I'm hoping we can talk about the Quentin Tarantino film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I know you just wrote a blog post. It's flyingwrestler.com?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. And spoiler alert for anyone tuning in. From the problem perspective, what are some of the biggest problems is it really characters? I mean, is there really one protagonist in the film? I should ask first, probably.
Well, my take on it, on Once a Time in Hollywood, is that it's set up like there are three stories, three characters that we're following, right? The three stars of the movie. And I didn't really feel that Margot Robbie had a story per se because she didn't really have a problem. So there was not really a problem for her to try to address. It was more just we're meeting her and we're seeing what she's like, and we're seeing her being kind of a giddy, young actress watching a movie that she's in and how she's excited. So we establish her as a sympathetic character. So it's not like she really has a story per se. She's just a presence in the movie who gets some of her own scenes, which is somewhat unusual, but she doesn't take up a huge chunk of the movie. Then you have two other characters who each have a problem in their lives. I would say, Leonardo DiCaprio's character feels like his acting career is sort of, on the wane, and Brad Pitt is, not really working as a stuntman anymore and doesn't kind of like have the life he really wants either. So they're both set up in a way that they have kind of a problem in their life, a generalized problem like you normally have at the beginning of a movie. What they don't really have is the more traditional kind of catalyst that rocks their world. Like one big event happens where it's like, now I've got a particular goal or a particular mission I'm on to try to solve this big problem that's going to take the whole movie to solve. It doesn't really work in that traditional way because I would say Leo's problem, he's not trying to solve it. He's more just kind of stuck in it. And he gets this job acting on a TV show and he's not necessarily that excited about it. He's not using that to try to like fix something in his acting career. He's just doing it because he's got this gig to do. Same thing with Brad Pitt. He's kind of hanging out and doing what his current job is and living his current life. So to me, it's a more non-traditional kind of day in the life, slice of life type of movie in a way, where we spend, I think it's like 2 full days in their lives and then another day that happens months later at the end, where we're not seeing characters actively trying to fix some life problem that's urgent. It's more that they kind of have, well, for Brad and Leo, they kind of have problems, but they're not out there, how do I fix my problem, so to speak. Then the end of the movie gives us an interesting, unexpected kind of sense of resolution that happens, but it kind of happens where we feel like Leo's life is going to take a positive turn maybe because of everything that happened. But it kind of comes more through the back door. It's not the usual, he's trying to do something and it's building to a climax. It's more that he's just kind of like living his life, and it's told in a way that some people are describing as meandering, so that the pace is not the normal Hollywood movie pace. So the movie's really stayed with me, and there's a lot that I like about it, and I find myself like reading about it and so forth. So it was more just I wanted to point out what I think are at the heart of what some people aren't loving about it, which is a sense of maybe a slow pace or a sense of what's this movie really about. It doesn't have the normal kind of story. And I wasn't prepared for the length or for that pace when I went in based on the trailers and so forth. So I was kind of like, oh, this is really not the normal kind of storytelling that we're used to. And it's not really a story in the normal way. It's more like 3 characters with a certain life situation, and we're just living life with them for a couple of days.
What if the protagonist was actually Hollywood and the industry, and the reason that there's no particular one problem is that it shows the different levels of problems and the contrast? So you have Brad Pitt's character who seems pretty satisfied with his life, even though by most people's definition it would not be success. Whereas Leonardo DiCaprio, is it Rick Dalton? His would actually be, I mean, he's in his pool like rehearsing lines for a film. So but that's kind of how this town, like you see a lot of people that seem like they're very unsatisfied, but they actually have achieved so much. So that's really the problem, is just sort of the viewpoint of the industry. Maybe I'm getting too metaphysical.
Well, I mean, movies work on a number of different levels, and I think that it does do that. It's exploring life in Hollywood during a certain period of time, life in Los Angeles during a changing time in our society, and it does it in ways that I think are really interesting. I would just say that Hollywood can't be a protagonist. Like a place isn't a protagonist in the way I would just define it, or a main character, because to me, a main character or a protagonist is a person, typically, who's got something they're trying to solve. They're a sentient being who's got an issue that we can all relate to, that they're out there in life trying to fix that issue. So obviously Hollywood isn't doing that, so they can't really stand in for a main character. Hollywood can't as a whole. But he may have been well aware that he was doing it this way on purpose, and that it wasn't traditional, and that's okay. And it is okay. It's making a lot of money. It's getting great reviews. It's going to win awards. There's just maybe some people that walk out going, oh, I didn't like it as much as I thought I would, which happens with pretty much every movie. So, but as somebody who's like kind of teaching screenwriting and analyzing why I like and don't like different things, I tend to sit down at the blog and go, well, here's my take on it, and here's why I thought it could have been shorter.
So one would figure that a story about the entertainment industry would be inherent with conflict. You'd almost have to take parts of conflict out, but you felt possibly that the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood did not have enough conflict?
It's not that it didn't have enough conflict. It did have conflict in it. I would say Margot Robbie's slice of the story didn't have any conflict in it, but that's a very small slice. I would say that it's more that characters aren't actively pursuing resolution to a pressing problem or desire that they're focused on, that's building and escalating over the course of the film. But there is conflict. Also, the scenes tend to be very long, longer than we're used to, and they may feel like nothing's really happening regarding the conflict or the problem for quite a long time. Like, Leo's on the set and he sits down next to this child actress and they have this conversation that doesn't feel like it's necessarily like it's taking a while, but it's well written and it's engaging in its own way. It's just not the typical length and pacing that we're used to, which some people might find very refreshing. I know that they do. But others might be like, where's this going? Why are we just sitting here on this kind of mundane conversation? But eventually it leads somewhere, which is he wants to impress this little girl actor. And then we have this scene that he does with her, which is also a very long scene in a movie. In other words, they take much more time than you would normally see to show that he puts on a good performance and impresses her and feels good about it. They don't do it as quickly as movies typically do in today's Hollywood, or even in 1969 Hollywood probably, although the pacing then was definitely slower than it is now. And who knows if that was one of his thoughts, that I'm going to a kind of pacing that's more of a bygone era. I'm not sure.
And with the Sharon Tate character played by Margot Robbie, if people are aware of Sharon Tate's story, maybe is there some magic in showing this like amazing dreamlike life, beautiful woman, seems sweet. But then if you go back and you research, you realize that it's very tragic up until that, point.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that, and some people point that out in comments on the blog post I did, which I think they're right in saying the audience, if they know what happened with the Manson murders, there's an inherent tension waiting to see what's going to happen with the Manson murders. And even though none of our main characters are actively trying to do anything to solve anything other than the one very compelling scene where Brad Pitt is at Spahn Ranch, the rest of the time they're kind of oblivious to or not focused on that. And so, yeah, it puts this character in jeopardy. We know what Sharon Tate is facing. So, yeah, I think that is kind of their way of giving you a story that has a resolution at the end. It just doesn't have the typical thing of characters are trying to solve it over the course of the middle. They're just kind of living their lives, in the end, put in a situation where something really huge happens that ends up creating a resolution. But one thing I think I noted also in my post is that the Tarantino movies I know usually have life and death stakes pretty much constantly underlying almost every scene, like Pulp Fiction, Inglourious Bastards, Reservoir Dogs. And so those scenes in those movies also tend to be quite long, like the opening scene in Inglourious Bastards, which is this really great scene. But it's got life and death tension at every moment. So we're on the edge of our seats going, at some point, this is going to turn and someone's going to get killed. When you don't have that tension, I think it's harder to get away with longer scenes, although he seems to be getting away with it with in a lot of ways. With this movie is doing very well, and I'm not trying to completely slam it, but as I analyze my own reaction and some other people saying it feels meandering and so forth, plotless in a way, I think that's kind of what they're referring to.